Hello and welcome to the third video in the short series of videos entitled Road to Recovery by AC Education. My name is Sheila Mulvenney. I am an ex-head teacher of virtual schools for children in care and a freelance trainer. So over these videos we've just been thinking a little bit about what we know has happened in terms of the coronavirus outbreak and the impact that has had on children and families. And we thought a little bit about the fact that although certain things are similar for everyone, there are lots of differences and people have their own individual stories as well. And then in the second short video, we thought about what we need to find out. Making assumptions can lead us to places we don't want to go. We can make the wrong assumptions. We have to make certain assumptions for the world to keep going because we get bombarded with so much information. So often we do make judgments, we do make assumptions, but we also need to be quite wary about those assumptions because they might not actually tell us the real tale. So what we want to do is find out from children and from families what their experience of this situation was, because every child will have a different story. And some of the children that we think will have had quite a reasonable time may have experienced things that means it was actually very stressful, and children that we think may have had a very stressful time might have been put in a situation where it wasn't. What we know for certain is this will have been experienced differently by different children. Some children will have experienced a lot of stress and anxiety and worse, and other children will have experienced possibly a real easing of anxiety and pressure. So what we're going to look at briefly in this video is what we need to do in terms of preparing for children going back. Now, obviously, I know schools are busy working very hard putting plans in place, but this series of videos is entitled The Road to Recovery. So our particular focus is how can we create spaces in schools and in classrooms that allow the chance for children to recover. And what we looked at in the last video bit was how do we find out which are the children that need that space the most? Which are the children whose experiences mean that they'll be coming back into school and won't be anywhere near learning until they have a bit of a space to settle, to heal, to recover, to feel once again connected, to feel once again used to what's going on. So we're just going to kind of explore that a little bit together in terms of kind of asking questions. Now, the first thing that I think is really important is that schools need to be places that have a culture of care. My own feeling is that care never goes amiss, that to be compassionate and to be kind and to be considerate and to be nurturing never does anybody any harm. Yes, some children might not need that as much as others, but it's not going to do any child harm. Yes, we also need certain boundaries and we need certain sort of, kind of rules in place to keep people safe, but there needs to be a culture of care. Now, in many ways, I visit a lot of schools as a trainer, and in my previous roles as head teacher of virtual school and working in inclusion, I've always visited quite a lot of schools, quite apart from working in them before. And one of the things I would say is whatever the mission statement might say on the wall, I would say give me 5 minutes in reception and I could probably experience what the culture of that school is. So a culture is not about what we put on the wall. It's about how everybody in that environment and organisation behaves. In many ways, it's easier to tell the culture by what people don't do than what they do. And the way it stands out is when things jar. I'll just give you a couple of for instances. So sometimes I'll visit a school and you'll walk into the reception area and it might be beautifully decorated. It might have lots of great colour. If it's a primary school, there might be lots of posters on the wall, lots of really helpful write-on kind of posters, about valuing people and things like that. And but I may be met by quite a curt receptionist. And I'm big enough to realise that she might be having a bad day and I wouldn't let that impact me too much, but I might also be left to wait and not know how long I'm going to be waiting. I might not be shown where the toilets are. I might not be asked if I'm okay. Sometimes I travel a long way to get to schools, whereas I'll go into another school and straight away I will be welcomed. I will be shown where the toilets are. I'll be asked if I would like a glass of water or a cup of tea or whatever. If the person is busy, they'll say, oh, they're busy till such and such a time, but I'll come and let you know when they're free. Or they'll say, I know they're expecting you, would you mind taking a seat? Now, all of those little things count when you're a visitor. And I think that's where the culture comes out. And I'm lucky enough to have done a lot of training in schools where the training isn't just for the SLT and the qualified staff, or even the teaching support staff, but it's for everybody. It's for the dinner ladies, the playground and gentlemen, the playground supervisors, the site agents. And that's when you can start to create a whole school culture, when everyone has access to the same knowledge, because you cannot expect people to deliver on values that you have if you haven't explained to them why you have those values. So from my point of view, I think every teacher in every classroom would do well to understand the impact of trauma and adversity and attachment issues on children, because it impacts their behaviour. And because whilst we can respond to that behaviour with rewards and sanctions, that is unlikely to bring about the changes that we want to see. And that's obviously subject to a whole of other training that you can access on things like trauma and attachment. So I think creating a culture of care is vital. And I would urge all school leaders now, but individual members within schools, to think, what would a culture of care be like in our society, in our school, sorry. So what would we have on the walls? What message do we want to give to children? What would we have in our classrooms? How would we be wanting people to greet children? How would we be wanting people to talk to children, even when they're having to put a boundary in place or to reflect with a child about their behaviour? So that's the first thing, how we can create cultures of care, because I think we're going to need them. The second thing is ensuring that the adults within the school are adequately supported emotionally. Now, as a manager, the job is to make sure that people that you're managing are equipped to do the job that you want them to do. That means having the right knowledge, the right training, the right support. I think when children return to school, we are foolish if we think that things will be as they were before, because I don't think they will. And I think what the adults in the school need is to know that someone is there that can support them. We don't live in a vacuum. Some of the people that are returning to school or have been working throughout, juggling, managing their own job around having their children at home, possibly having ill relatives, possibly losing people. So there are all sorts of issues that the adults will have been through too, and they need to know that they are emotionally supported. If we support the adults in a school environment, the adults are then able to support the children, because as we saw in the last video, as we talked about, emotions are contagious. If we have a lot of anxious adults, that will create a lot of anxious children. If we have calm adults, we might still have anxious children, but they will calm more quickly when we have adults who can be regulated and calm themselves, or if they suddenly feel themselves becoming anxious, know that they can go somewhere for support without facing judgment and criticism. Another thing is that we need to prioritise well-being. We know that children learn best when they are calm and when they feel safe. There is a very good video you can look up called The Learning Brain versus the Survival Brain. And it quite simply shows how, if children are feeling anxious, if they're not feeling safe, they will not be in a place where they can learn. So as wise teachers and school staff, what we need to do is create situations that children feel safe and secure in. We can think about what makes us feel safe by just reflecting a little bit on the last few months that we've had. A lot of people have felt anxious because they don't know what's happening, because things are not like normal, because their familiar routines are disrupted. And all of those things count for children and count in terms of them feeling safe. And I think I mentioned briefly in the last video that we need to remind ourselves that feeling safe and being safe might be very different things. So we need to create classrooms and school environments where children feel safe. Now that is a tall order at the minute, because actually children might be going back to school having to wash hands more frequently, stay 2 meters apart, wipe things down. So that is a tall order for staff, but I think that's where we need to put our energies. I don't think we need to worry too much about the learning gap at the minute. What we need to do is worry about children feeling safe. When children feel safe, they will be able to learn. So the job for us as adults is how can we create environments where children feel safe. We also need to identify, which we talked about last time, we need to be doing the work to identify those who are in the greatest need of help. Now, there are some things we can do universally. We can create schools that have a culture of care. We can create schools where there is an environment where children feel safe. But we also need to be able to pick out, pinpoint, identify the children who are in greatest need of help before they have to show us through their behaviour that they need help. And that's where finding out their story, finding out what's happened in whatever way we can, will help us to identify how we can put in place things that that child can access easily if they need support. Now, obviously, my experience is teachers and school staff know their children really well, and all we need to do, therefore, is find out about their recent experience and add that to the knowledge we already have about them, and then create ways that we can offer support that are easy for the children to access. And we need to work out how that fits with our whole school ethos and our culture. And it can be simple things like just assuming at first, and I've already mentioned the dangers of assuming, but it's almost safer to assume that every child will need some input than assume that no child will. And then to start narrowing that group down. So the first few days back in class, children are going to want to feel that they're in a familiar environment. And of course, what we know is it might be very different from the environment that left. So doing things like creating familiarity, doing some things that they did before, so it feels that things are predictable. And there's a whole range of things we can do to help children feel supported and safe. And when we do that, that's when children will be able to learn. So thank you for listening, and of course there will be more advice and courses available by AC Education, which I'm sure you'll find helpful for planning the return for children to school.